File ownership and file permissions are important concepts in multi-user or networked environments. Ubuntu uses the file permissions behavior from Linux, which inherits from this traditional Unix way of doing it. So who has access to which files, and what a user is allowed to do with that file? In this video, I'll introduce a few basics of file permissions to get you started, and we'll do it mostly through a file manager to keep things simple. So let's open up the file manager either by clicking on the icon from the launcher or hitting Ctrl-N to bring it up. Now we'll go to Documents and we'll look at our files. Let's look at it in List View, and I'll right click. We can go to Properties and Permissions, and that tells us what people are allowed to do with it. So the owner of the file, which tells me it's me, Steve Scott, has access to read and write the file. The group Steve Scott, which I'm a part of, and here's a list of some other groups on the system, are also allowed to read-write. But others, any other users in the system, except for root, are allowed to read only this file, and they're not allowed to execute it. So if I can do read-write, I can allow executing file as a program. So these are some of the basic permissions. Now if I can change that and open up the terminal, and let's go into Documents, and if I do ls-l, it'll show me the owner of the file, the group owner of the file. So it's owned by Steve Scott the user and Steve Scott the group. The permissions, so the first permission here is ignored. This signifies a certain flag, like if you see a D at the beginning of the permissions. So this is our permission here. If you see a D instead of this hyphen or minus sign, it means directory. Then we have read, write, execute for the owner of the file, read, write, execute for the group Steve Scott, and read, write, execute for everyone else. But this other file, it only has read, write permissions and read permissions for everyone else. Now I can also go in and let's click on some file, and let's say I want to remove those permissions. I can put in none, close, and if I do ls-l, you'll see it remove this read permission here. Now if I do something like switch to root, so sudo su, this will switch me to the root account. You'll see here I've gone from being user Steve Scott to user root, and I'll use Vim. I'll call it roots file.txt, and this file belongs to root. We'll put in some sentence, we'll write it, we'll quit out, and if we go ls-l now, you'll see that I have this new file I've created is owned by the root user and the root group, and it's read-write for the root user and read for anyone who's a root user and read for everyone else. Now if I look here, if I right-click, I can open with gedit, the graphical editor. It says this file belongs to root. If I try to make some changes and I try to save, well, save is grayed out because it's opened as read-only, because that's the only permission as Steve Scott I'm allowed to have. So I'll have to exit out and close without saving because I'm not allowed to edit this file. And if I go to Properties, Permissions, you'll see this is all grayed out because I'm not the owner of this file and I don't have permission to write it, so I can't change any of these permissions. So that file belongs to root. So that's pretty much the basics of file permissions and ownership. Now if I wanted to change it, I can also do, I don't want to get into it too much in detail, I can also change it from the command line. There's chmod, so change the mode of the file, and I can use some certain flags to change the permissions if I'm the owner of that file. Or I can use the ch or chown command to change the owner of the file. I'm not going to get into that in this video. I just wanted to get across the basics of what these RWXs mean when you see them here, or when you see this little lock and you can't change the properties or permissions of a file. And that'll conclude this introduction to file permissions in Ubuntu.